Hello everyone and welcome back to our channel. Today we are continuing our class on the history of Saturnalia, Sol Invictus, the January Kalends, and early Christianity and the observance of the birth of Christ and the Germanic traditions and how that all blended together and syncretized and became what we consider Christmas time and the Christmas festivities of the modern era. Today we are covering Saturnalia, Sol Invictus, and January Kalends. In the next class after that, we will be covering the early Christian narrative around the Nativity and how the observance of Christ's birth got moved to December 25th. And then after that, we'll start getting into the Germanic traditions and the celebrations of Yule. There's a lot of information to cover. We've only barely gotten started. This is the second class following the intro, so thanks for sticking with me and coming back for this one. Two of the ancient midwinter festivals that blended together into our modern idea of Christmas are the Saturnalia of ancient Rome and Yule in Northern Europe. Please note that not all of what has become common in Christmas originated from these two festivals. Over the course of the class series, we will cover other contributing cultures and events within those cultures. However, a lot of the imagery associated with modern-day Christmas originates from those two and how they syncretized and blended together after the spread of Roman Catholicism through the Germanic regions. Both Saturnalia and Yule have the common elements that we documented in the first class of this series. I'm just going to go ahead and put it somewhere here, which was the intro and overview of the class series, and which also covered some of the archaeological monuments that prove that ancient people celebrated the winter solstice, or at least commemorated and made note of it if it wasn't a celebration. So today, however, we are going into Saturnalia. As we previously noted in the class I was just talking about, the intro series, winter varies based on location, and thus midwinter festivals do as well. In the mild climate of southern Italy, where the Romans lived, the weeks after the winter solstice were a good time to begin clearing the fields and planting the crops that would ripen in late spring, before the hot, dry Italian summer. Instead of winter being the starvation time, it was actually a time of plenty, and summer was the starvation time. This variance in the cultural idea of winter significantly affected the differences between Saturnalia and Yule. Saturnalia was an ancient Roman festival in honor of the god Saturn, held on the 17th of December in the Julian calendar and later expanded with festivities through to the 23rd of December. The celebration of Saturnalia began in Rome at least 200 years or more before the birth of Jesus. It likely began as an even older midwinter agricultural harvest festival. By the time that Saturnalia had become popular, the origins of the Roman god Saturn were lost to historical record. It was likely that he was a kind of agricultural deity who had an established village on Capitoline Hill, one of the 7 hills of Rome. Saturn was associated with an era of bounty and prosperity referred to as the Golden Age of Rome. The Golden Age was a mythical time when humans enjoyed the spontaneous bounty of the earth without labor. The term Golden Age comes originally from Greek mythology prior to the Roman belief therein, particularly the works and days of Hesiod, and is part of the description of temporal decline of the state of peoples through the 5 ages. Gold was the first age and the one during which the golden race of humanity lived. After it ended was the Silver Age, then the Bronze Age, after this the Heroic Age, and then the 5th and current age being the Iron Age. To the Romans, the Golden Age was a period of primordial peace, harmony, stability, and prosperity. People did not have to work to feed themselves, for the earth provided food in abundance. They lived to a very old age with a youthful appearance, eventually dying peacefully, with spirits living on as guardians. Plato in the Cratylus recounted the golden race of humans who came first. He clarified that Hesiod did not mean that people were literally made out of gold, but rather that they were good and noble and innocent. The revelries of Saturnalia were supposed to reflect the conditions of the lost mythical Golden Age. By the Christianization of Rome, Saturn was said to have taught the people of Rome how to till the soil when the Golden Age ended and mankind had to actually work for their food. Just as the idea of the Golden Age came from the Greeks, so did the celebration of Saturnalia. Saturnalia was the Roman equivalent of an earlier Greek holiday called Chronia, which was celebrated during the Attic month of Hekatomaion. I probably mispronounced that, in late midsummer. The Roman writer Macrobius, fully Macrobius Ambrosius Theodosius, also known as Theodosius, a Roman provincial who lived during the early 5th century during the late antiquity, the period of time corresponding to the late Roman Empire to the early Middle Ages, author of Commentari in Somnium Scipionis, the commentary on the dream of Scipio, and the Saturnalia, a compendium of ancient Roman religions and antiquarian lore, and De Differentis et Societatibus Graeci Latinic Verbi, on the differences and similarities of the Greek and Latin verb, which is unfortunately now lost, wrote in approximately 400 CE in Saturnalia, Book 1, Chapter 21. In Greece and lands to the east, they tell the story of Adonis, who was killed by a wild boar. That animal is a symbol of winter because a boar is a rough and brutal creature that loves damp, muddy, and frost-covered places and feeds on acorns, which are a winter crop. This story is a way of saying that winter wounds the sun, for in winter we find the sun's heat and light failing, in the same way that strength and energy fade away from all the creatures at death. So there was at least some of the same associations that we see in Yule, with the sun dying and slumber being like death, and this period of restfulness being something where we're concerned that maybe the sun has died and won't come back. The ancient Roman historian Justinus believed Saturn was an actual historical king of the pre-Roman inhabitants of Italy. From Justinus' Epitome of Pompeius Trogus, the first inhabitants of Italy were the Aborigines, whose king, Saturnus, is said to have been a man of such extraordinary justice that no one was a slave in his reign or had any private property, but all things were common to all and undivided, as one estate for the use of everyone, in memory of which way of life it has been ordered that at the Saturnalia slaves should everywhere sit down with their masters at the entertainments, the rank of all being made equal. The holiday was celebrated with a sacrifice at the Temple of Saturn in the Roman Forum and a public banquet, followed by private gift-giving, continual partying, and a carnival atmosphere that overturned Roman social norms. The celebration of Saturnalia began at the Temple to Saturn on the hill in Rome. Dedicated in the 490s BCE, the Temple of Saturn was likely the third oldest sacred place in Rome, after the temples of Vesta and Jupiter. It was rebuilt in 42 BCE and again in the 4th century CE. The temple's high podium and the columns of the porch still stand today. After the Golden Age, Saturn continued to be associated with wealth, so his temple housed the treasury of Rome, called the Aerarium. The Aerarium was where the Roman Republic's reserves of gold and silver were stored, along with the state archives and the insignia and official scale for the weighing of metals. Later, the Aerarium was moved to another building, and the archives transferred to the nearby Tabularium. The temple's podium, constructed out of concrete covered with travertine, was used for posting bills. The altar of Saturn, which stood in front of the temple, is thought to have been much older and was associated with Saturn's founding of the city on the Capitoline Hill. Although probably the best known Roman holiday, Saturnalia as a whole was not described from beginning to end in any single ancient source. The modern historical understanding of the festival is pieced together from several accounts dealing with various aspects. The festivities of Saturnalia were the dramatic setting of the multi-volume work of that name by the aforementioned Macrobius. Macrobius described the reign of Justinian's King Saturn as a time of great happiness, both on account of the universal plenty that prevailed, and because as yet there was no division into bond and free, as one may gather from the complete license enjoyed by slaves at the Saturnalia. In Lucian's Saturnalia, it is Cronus himself who proclaims a festive season, when 'tis lawful to be drunken, and slaves have license to revile their lords. In one interpretation of Macrobius, medieval mythography from Roman North Africa to the school of Chartres, AD 433 to 1177, by Jane Chance, Saturnalia is considered a festival of light, leading to the winter solstice, with the abundant presence of candles symbolizing the quest for knowledge and truth. However, the renewal of light and the coming of the new year was celebrated in the later Roman Empire, the Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, the birthday of the incomparable sun, on the 23rd of December, and then later on the 25th of December, not on Saturnalia. The popularity of Saturnalia continued into the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, and as the Roman Empire came under Christian rule. So what were the festivities actually like from historical record? The statue of Saturn at the temple was filled with oil and bound with woolen bonds. The festival of Saturnalia began when the woolen bonds were taken off, which was seen as unleashing the power of Saturn into the city. Let's talk about human sacrifice at Saturnalia. Saturn also had a less benevolent aspect. One of his consorts was Lua, sometimes called Lua Saturni, Saturn's Lua, and identified with Lua Mater, the mother of destruction, a goddess in whose honor the weapons of enemies killed in war were burned. Some historians believe that the death of enemies in war were offered to the goddess as a form of expiation, basically giving her the destruction of others rather than the destruction of the soldiers of their own empire. Saturn's chthonic nature connected him to the underworld and its ruler Dispater, the Roman equivalent of the Greek Pluto in Latin, who was also a god of hidden wealth. In sources from the 3rd century CE and later, Saturn is recorded as receiving dead gladiators as offerings during or near the Saturnalia. These gladiatorial events, 10 days in all throughout December, were presented mainly by the quaestors and sponsored with the funds from the treasury of Saturn. The Roman historian Livy, in full Titus Livius, who lived from around 59 or 64, somewhere in there, BCE to 17 CE, one of the 3 great Roman historians, along with Sallust and Tacitus, recorded a human sacrifice during the Saturnalia of 217 BCE. Victims were slain at the Temple of Saturn in Rome in order to muster favor with the gods during the Second Punic War, following the military success of Hannibal. I want to go into a little bit more depth on the gladiatorial events that we just described, the 10 days all throughout December, because that's one of the main ways that we think that Saturn might have been given human sacrifice. Not soldiers in war, but specifically gladiators sacrificed to Saturn during Saturnalia. It's possible that Saturn was given human sacrifices in the form of gladiator munera. In ancient Rome, munera, which is the Latin plural, were the provision of public works and entertainments provided by people for the benefit of the Roman people, the populus Romanus. Now, the people who provided this were individuals of high status and wealth. The word munera, singular, munis, which is actually the root of the English word munificence, translates to duty or obligation and describes the individual's responsibility to provide a service or contribution to that individual's community. The production of munera was dependent on the private largesse of an individual, in contrast to the ludi, the games, athletic contests, or spectacles that were sponsored by the state. So you have the state paying for some things, and then you have wealthy individuals having a cultural obligation to also provide and to give as part of that public spectacle. The most famous munera were the gladiatorial contests, which began as a service or gift rendered to the dead at funeral games. The gladiatorial game itself would be dedicated to a god, and although deaths in the arena were far more rare than is depicted in modern media, they did occur, and the deaths would be dedicated as well as the game itself as a form of sacrifice. Now I want to be clear, we have the wrong idea about gladiatorial fights in modern history, and it's really Hollywood's fault. We have this idea that gladiators were being slaughtered left, right, and center, and that it was really, really common, but gladiators were expensive. They took a lot of money to maintain, and they were kind of the stars of their day. Like they were really well known, and people praised them and wore their sweat as perfume, and other strange ways of celebrating their fame, but they were famous, and they were not treated as something to be casually thrown away. But when a death did happen, it was likely that the death was given as a form of sacrifice. Like, well, they died anyway, so here, God, take this sacrifice. But it was the games themselves that were considered the sacrifice. And this is one of the things that people misunderstand about ancient cultures. A sacrifice doesn't always have to be a human. That's why we clarify when we say human sacrifice. In this case, the sacrifice was the money to put on the game, which was given by both the state and these wealthy individuals, and the effort of participating in the game, the blood and sweat of the gladiators. And then if someone happened to die, they were also considered a human sacrifice. But they were only one part of the gladiatorial sacrifice at Saturnalia. The practice of gladiator munera was criticized by Christian apologists as a form of human sacrifice. A lot of our ideas of how it worked come from later Christians demonizing and vilifying the practice. And I'm not trying to defend the practice. There were some gross things associated with gladiatorial combat, slavery being a pretty icky part of that. But it certainly wasn't how Spartacus' blood and sand made it seem. Although there is no evidence of this practice during the Republic, the offering of gladiators led to later theories that the primeval Saturn had demanded human victims. Macrobius said that Dispater was placated with human heads, and Saturn was sacrificial victims consisting of men, Viorium victimis. During the visit of Heracles to Italy, the civilizing demigod was said to have insisted that the practice be halted and the ritual be reinterpreted. Instead of heads to Dispater, the Romans were to offer effigies or masks, oscilla. A mask appears in the representation of Saturnalia in the calendar of Philoquilus. Since the Greek word phota meant both man and lights, candles were a substitute offering to Saturn for the light of life. The idea of Saturnalia as a festival of light likely comes from the practice of using candles as offerings to Saturn. The figurines that were exchanged as gifts, sigillaria, may also have represented token substitutes for human sacrifice. By the mid-Republic, human sacrifices to Saturn would not have been common. The reference by Livy was one of the last recorded instances we have of the sacrifice of several slaves as a desperate attempt to appease the gods in the aftermath of Cannae. And Livy specifically pointed out that these sacrifices were wholly alien to the Roman spirit. It can be interpreted that by the mid-Republic, it was an ancient practice that was resurrected out of desperate circumstances. It should be noted, of course, that the Romans continued to bury Vestal virgins alive if found out that they had sex while serving as Vestals, which is also surely a form of human sacrifice. The sacrifice of Vestal virgins and human sacrifice, indeed, may have been connected. Similar sacrifices and the sacrifice of Vestal Virgins had occurred in 228 BC in the face of a huge Gallic invasion, and again in 113 BCE related to the massive migration of Germans floating around at the time. We don't know the connection or details of these sacrifices, other than the specific selection of victims, a pair of Gauls and a pair of Greeks apparently, but it seems clear that these were fairly desperate and atypical rituals. As time went on, the Romans, as expressed by Livy with his holy alien remark, written well after the last recorded instance of the above sacrifice occurred, not only rarely practiced or did not practice at all human sacrifice, they also expressed disdain for it. They criticized Carthage for the widespread use of the practice and also used it as a justification for the suppression of other religious groups, such as the Druids. It was used, as we discussed in the history of Samhain, All-Hallowtide, and Halloween in one of our other courses in this series of the history of religion, by the Romans as propaganda against the pagans and barbarians. By the imperial period, it's pretty clear the Romans didn't think much of human sacrifice at all, as they were using it to say, like, these pagans are so evil and bad because they do practice this, which we talked about whether or not they actually did practice that, whether or not it was just a form of wartime propaganda. And I'm just gonna point up here. I hope I can link that. I already linked something. Maybe you can only link one video. I don't know. We'll find out. Anyway, so this was a lot of history to just rattle off, but basically, we think that human sacrifice was made to Saturn. Now, whether that was soldiers who were already dead, the opposition in war, or gladiatorial deaths that happened, semi-accidentally, and they were like, okay, we're just going to go ahead and dedicate this anyway, or whether they were specifically people killed at his statue, as later Christians seem to think occurred, we don't know for sure. We know that eventually the Romans started accusing everybody else of human sacrifice and saying that, no, we don't do this, but we know that they did it at least sometimes. So it's one of those things where we don't know for sure what the practice originally looked like, but we know that by the time that Saturnalia is better documented, they were offering candles and wax figures that looked like people or that were masks of people instead of actual humans. So I hope that made sense to everyone. You can sort of see what we do and do not know about that practice. Let's talk about what happened after the sacrifice of either people or wax figures. Whether humans, animals, or wax figures were sacrificed to Saturn at Saturnalia, what followed was a great big party. Throughout the history of Rome, the party varied from 3 to 7 days. This is why Saturnalia is sometimes a singular term referring to the overall celebration, or a plural term referring to several days. The Roman writer Pliny the Younger, circa 62 to 113 CE, did not enjoy Saturnalia. He disliked it so much that he had a special soundproofed room built where he could hide away from the rest of his noisy household while they were celebrating. He wrote, "When I retire to this garden summer house, I fancy myself 100 miles away from my villa, and take especial pleasure in it at the feast of the Saturnalia, when, by the license of that festive season, every other part of my house resounds with my servants' mirth. Thus I neither interrupt their amusement, nor they my studies." So he basically was like, yes, the social order is inverted and you all can party, but I am going to be over here reading my books because I don't like this and I don't want any part of it. A contemporary of the aforementioned Macrobius, a Roman philosopher, Seneca the Younger, fully Lucius Annaeus Seneca, who lived from circa 4 BC to 65 CE, who was a Hispano-Roman Stoic philosopher, statesman, dramatist, and in one work, satirist from the Silver Age of Latin literature, wrote about Saturnalia. Quote, "It is now the month of December, when the greatest part of the city is in a bustle. loose reins are given to public dissipation. Everywhere you may hear the sound of great preparations, as if there are some real difference between the days devoted to Saturn and those for transacting business. Were you here, I would willingly confer with you as to the plan of our conduct, whether we should eve in our usual way, or to avoid singularity, both take a better supper and throw off the toga. Porphyry of Tyre, circa 234 to circa 305 CE, a Phoenician Neoplatonic philosopher born in Tyre, Roman Syria during Roman rule, who is most famous for editing and publishing the Aeneads, the only collection of the work of Plotinus, his teacher, interpreted the freedom associated with Saturnalia as symbolizing the freeing of souls into immortality. No one worked during this period, not even slaves, except those whose help was needed to provide food for the lavish feasts. Friends visited each other from home to home and also joined in boisterous street processions. All the houses, great halls, and streets were decorated with laurel, green trees, and shrubs. Everything was illuminated by candles and lamps, and huge bonfires were lit at high ground where all the citizens of Rome could see them. Catullus, fully Gaius Valerius Catullus, who lived from circa 84 to circa 54 BCE, a Latin poet of the late Roman Republic, called Saturnalia the best of days. So, how much did this look like modern-day Christmas? Did they exchange gifts? People did exchange small gifts, though the majority of those exchanged were usually gag gifts, or small figurines made of wax or pottery, known as the sigilleria. These gifts ranged from the modest to the extravagant and were sometimes bizarre. According to Martial, fully Marcus Valerius Martialis, who lived circa 38 to 41 CE to 102 to 104 CE, a Roman poet from Hispania, which is modern Spain, best known for his 12 books of epigrams, published in Rome between 86 and 103 CE, said that these gifts included perfumes, sausages, dice, wine, hair, ear picks, sponges, bladder footballs, woolen slippers, parrots, and sheep's heads. The history of odd and gag gifts contributed to the historical documentation of a number of complaints from recipients during the Saturnalia. Martial detested the cheap quality of the gifts he received from his friend Umber, who was recycling his own unwanted presents. He grumbled that he had been gifted, quote, everything which you have received during the past 5 days, end quote. Likewise, when Catullus received an excruciatingly bad book of poems as a joke from his friend Calvus, he moaned in his writing, "What have I said or done to deserve it, that you're killing me now with all of these poets?" So as you can see, these gifts were really more gag gifts. They were given as a funny thing, or given as like, here, have a stand-in for human sacrifice that you can go give Saturn. And that was because the gift giving was generally done during the January Kalends, which we'll get into before the end of this class. So let's talk about themes of equality and reversal of caste, because we've talked about it a little bit. Let's get into it a little more in depth. The two major themes of the idealized Saturnalian Golden Age were abundance and equality. When those ancient writers were describing Saturnalia, one of the things that they said over and over and over again was that there wasn't any caste system. There were no slaves. Everything was so abundant that there was just equality for all. In real life, the people of Rome were treated very differently based on class or caste, depending upon whether they were part of the nobility or the artisans, or whether they were slaves. But in the few days of the annual Saturnalia celebration, everyone was to be treated equally. Lucian of Samosata, who lived from circa 120 to 180 CE, an Assyrian satirist and rhetorician, best known for his characteristic tongue-in-cheek style, with which he frequently ridiculed superstition, religious practices, and belief in the paranormal, wrote a dialogue between Saturn, also called Cronus, and his priest, and the conversation included the rules for Saturnalia. During this celebration, Saturn proclaimed, Let every man be treated equal, slave and free man, poor and rich. And he also directed that no one may be ill-tempered or cross or threaten anybody. When it came to banquets, the guidelines included, each man shall take the couch where he happens to be. Rank, family, or wealth shall have little influence on privilege, that is, on a man's place at the table. All shall drink the same wine, and neither stomach trouble nor headache shall give the rich man an excuse for being the only one to drink the better quality. All shall have their meat on equal terms. The waiters shall not show favor to anyone. Neither are large portions to be placed before one and tiny ones before another, nor a ham for one and a pig's jaw for another. All must be treated equally. When a rich man gives a banquet to his servants, his friends shall aid him in waiting on them. The last instruction specifically refers to the Saturnalian practice of social inversion, or a reversal of roles. Not only were slaves excused from their duties and not subject to punishments during the Saturnalia, but there was an entire reversal, with the masters waiting on the slaves at the banquets. In wealthier Roman households, the Saturnalicius princeps, or leader of Saturnalia, was selected from among the slaves. The selected person was responsible for organizing the merrymaking and mischief during the celebrations. The person was seen as the ruler of chaos, which was in direct contrast to the normal, orderly manner of Roman life. In addition, he was in charge of making offerings to the Penates, who were Roman household gods associated with domestic life. The aforementioned Macrobius wrote, "Meanwhile, the head of the slave household, whose responsibility it was to offer sacrifice to the Penates, to manage the provisions and to direct the activities of the domestic servants, came to tell his master that the household had feasted according to the annual ritual custom. For at this festival, in houses that keep to proper religious usage, they first of all honor the slaves with a dinner prepared as if for the master, and only afterwards is the table set again for the head of household. Then the chief slave came in to announce the time of dinner and summon the masters to the table. This mock king could be a person of any social standing, but it almost always was a person who didn't normally have any. In Lucian's dialogue, Saturn said to his priest that if he became king, you not only escape silly orders, but can give them yourself, telling one man to shout out something disgraceful about himself, another to dance naked, pick up the flute girl, and carry her 3 times around the house. So this rule had that this person, this mock king, could create all kinds of disorder to the natural, orderly rules of life in Rome. They could order you to strip naked and dance. They could order you to sing a silly song. The point was that they brought disorder, a topsy-turviness to Saturnalia. Later practices in medieval Europe also included similar customs that temporarily elevated average people, although it is unclear if they derived directly from the Saturnalicius princeps of the Roman Saturnalia. In medieval France, Switzerland, and other areas, a boy was chosen as bishop for a day on Holy Innocents' Day, December 28th, when Christians mourned Herod's massacre of the children. In the late medieval and Renaissance periods in England, some towns chose a lord of misrule as a sort of jester king to preside over all of the merrymaking. On the eve of Epiphany, some European cultures dropped a bean, a coin, or some other token into a cake or a pudding, and whoever found the bean in their piece of cake would be anointed king of the bean or queen of the bean. This practice has evolved into the modern king cake that is so popular in New Orleans. Wanton behaviors and orgies. Saturnalia was a time for excessive drinking, gambling, and other unrestrained activities. According to the aforementioned Lucian's dialogue, Saturn said that in his festive time he could drink and be drunk, shout, play games and dice, appointing masters of the revels, feast the servants, sing stark naked, clap and shake, and sometimes even get pushed headfirst into cold water with my face smeared with soot. If you were to look up Saturnalia in an English language dictionary in modern times, one of the definitions would likely be something like an unrestrained and often licentious celebration, an orgy, associated with excess and extravagance. The aforementioned Roman poet Martial published during the Saturnalia as he felt that the liberal spirit caused by the festival made the licentious nature of many of his epigrams permissible. Part of the topsy-turvy nature of Saturnalia was either pseudo-sexual or sexual. It was common, according to the historians who document it, for people to cross-dress, run in the street naked, and also to reverse sexual roles. Some of the acts described were people who normally were the dominant partner sexually, being the submissive partner, the person who normally was the penetrating partner, although Rome had some interesting ideas around that, becoming the partner that receives penetration. And also it was depicted, there was cunnilingus performed, which was not normally done. That was seen as no Roman gentleman, for lack of a better term, would perform that. But during Saturnalia, when everything was topsy-turvy, that was considered okay. Please note that I'm describing ancient practices and that I'm not trying to say that there is anything wrong with being subservient or a bottom or performing oral sex. I'm just saying that that was part of this role reversal. You know, I think that there is no such thing as clothing that is gendered. I think that you can wear whatever the hell you want, and you can be a man in a dress or a woman in a dress or a non-binary person in a dress. But it was seen as cross-dressing, and it was seen as part of this reversal of roles. Elagabalus, also written as Heliogabalus, who lived from circa 204 to the 11th of March 222 CE, officially known as Antoninus. Roman emperor from around 218 to 222 CE, said he was delighted to be called the mistress, the wife, the queen of Hierocles during Saturnalia, showing again a reversal of the prescribed and rigid caste-related roles that were apparent during homosexual affairs in Rome. His lover was a charioteer. Okay. The Jewish Saturnalia. The Kalends of January and Saturnalia are mentioned in the ancient rabbinic works of the Mishnah, the Tosefta, and the Palestinian and Babylonian Talmuds, and according to the Mishnah, it was one of the non-Jewish holidays on which it was forbidden for rabbinic Jews to interact economically with non-Jewish people. These individual Roman holidays, listed and described in rabbinic literature, have typically either been seen as mere historical data detailing the timing of historical events, or these holidays have been used to reconstruct the ancient Roman calendar. The Mishnah and the Babylonian Talmud describe a pagan festival called Saturnalia, which occurs for 8 days before the winter solstice. It is followed for 8 days after the solstice with a festival called Kalenda, culminating with the Kalends of January. The Talmud says that the origins of this festival is in Adam, who saw that the days were getting shorter and thought it was punishment for his sin. Adam, the Talmud says, was afraid that the world was returning to the chaos and emptiness that existed before creation. The Talmud says that he sat and fasted for 8 days. After the 8 days had passed, he saw that the days were getting longer again, and he realized that this was the natural cycle of the world, and so made 8 days of celebration. The Talmud states that this festival was later taken by the Romans and turned into a non-Hebrew festival, and refers to the stolen holiday as Saturnalia. The rabbis claimed in the Palestinian Talmud that the name of the festival Saturnalia is derived from a Hebrew phrase meaning hidden hatred. The Palestinian rabbis also claimed that the Kalends of January were actually founded by the biblical Adam, taking the holiday out of the hands of the Romans. In doing so, the rabbis assert that the Kalends of January is actually a biblical holiday that the Romans later corrupted. The ancient rabbis would have been writing after the Roman destruction of the temple in 70 CE. It is likely that this isn't them accurately describing history. There's certainly not a lot of historic record to back it up. It was likely an act of subversion and resistance to cultural genocide to describe Roman holidays and then invent Hebrew origin stories for those holidays. It helped the rabbis to vilify the Roman rule over Judea and promote rabbinical authority. The ancient Jewish descriptions of Roman holidays as having Jewish origins was a way that the ancient Jews responded to Jewish suffering under Roman rule. At least, that is the modern historical perspective on this. That is what a historian will tell you is occurring. As the origins of the festivals are lost to time, and most people say that Saturnalia had Greek roots, I'm not saying. My personal opinion is I wasn't there. I don't know. I know that the current historical theory is that this was a way of dealing with cultural genocide and occupation and pain, to say, actually, you corrupted all of our holidays. But I'm also not comfortable disputing the Hebrew oral accounts of their own history, so that's not for me to make up my mind on. All right, let's talk about Kalends January, or the January Kalends. We've already touched a little bit on the January Kalends, but I want to get more in depth on them. By the late 3rd century, Roman culture featured 3 festivals or celebrations or marking of the occasion from mid-December through to January. The first was Saturnalia, as we've already covered. The third major one was the January Kalends. Kalends is the Roman term that refers to the first day of every month. So every single month in the Roman calendar had a kalends. The English word calendar etymologically derives from the term. All of the kalends, which are the first day of each calendar month, were celebrated by the Romans, but the January celebrations were especially festive. So don't sort of go, oh, well, January had kalends and it was a big party and none of the other months did. No, they all had them and they were all celebrations. It's just that the January one was really important. In early Rome, the January Kalends were not considered the beginning of the year. The early Roman calendar designated the 1st of March as the first day of the year, and the calendar had just 10 months, beginning with March. That the new year once began with the month of March is still reflected in some of the names of the months, with September through December, the 9th through the 12 months of the Gregorian calendar, originally being the 7th through to the 10th months. Septem is Latin for 7, Octo for 8, Novem for 9, and Decem for 10. Roman legend usually credited their second king Numa with the establishment of the 2 new months of Januarius and Februarius. These were first placed at the end of the year, but at some point came to be considered the first 2 months instead. The January Kalend likely came to be celebrated as the new year at some point after it became the day for the inaugurating of new consuls in 153 BCE. Romans had long dated their years by these consulships rather than sequentially, and making the Kalends of January start the new year aligned with this style of dating. Still, private and religious celebrations around the March New Year continued for some time, and there is no historical consensus on the timing for the new year being associated with the beginning of January. Once it became the new year, however, it became a time for family gatherings and celebrations. A series of disasters, notably including the failed rebellion of M. Aemilius Lepidus in 78 BCE, established a superstition against allowing Rome's market days to fall on the Kalends of January, and the pontiffs employed intercalation to avoid this occurrence. So if the January Kalends fell on a market day, the pontiffs would alter the calendar and move the market day to avoid bad luck. This superstition actually persists in some areas of the world where you're not supposed to, on the very first day of the year, make any trades in the market. In 567 CE, the Council of Tours formally abolished the 1st of January as the beginning of the year. At various times and in various places throughout medieval Christian Europe, the New Year was celebrated on the 25th of December in honor of the birth of Jesus, on the 1st of March in the Old Roman style, on the 25th of March in honor of Lady Day and the Feast of the Annunciation, and on the movable feast of Easter. These days were also astronomically and astrologically significant, since at the time of the Julian Reform, the 25th of March had been understood as the spring equinox, and the 25th of December as the winter solstice. The Julian calendar's small disagreement with the solar year, however, shifted these days earlier, before the Council of Nicaea, which formed the basis of the calculations used during the Gregorian reform of the calendar. The 1st of January wasn't again officially the start date of the new year for Rome until 1544 CE in the Holy Roman Catholic Empire. So literally for 1,000 years, almost, just a little bit shy, this date, when the new year was, just kept moving around. And moved around and moved around and moved around. And actually it wasn't even until like this century that some nations accepted January 1st as the beginning of the year. Medieval calendars, nonetheless, often continued to display the months running from January to December, despite medieval readers reckoning the transition from one year to the next on various different days. So in the medieval period, people would be drawing the calendar and they would still start it with January, even if at that time the new year was officially celebrated on a different date. So if January wasn't always the new year for the Romans, and if the Kalends were the first of every month, what were the January Kalends like in Rome? Many Roman festivals or religious occasions reflect the Romans' agrarian way of life in their early history. The records of the Roman agricultural calendars, Menologia Rustica, depict that for Roman farmers, January was part of the aforementioned relatively easy time that they experienced in December. For January, the Roman farming almanacs advised farmers to expect 9 3/4 hours of daylight and 14.5 hours of darkness, and to use this time to sharpen stakes, cut willows and reeds, and offer sacrifices to the penates. We already mentioned the penates, with the Lord of Misrule and Saturnalia, but let's get into them a little bit more. In the ancient religion, the penates were among the familiares, or household deities, invoked most often in domestic rituals. When the family had a meal, they threw a bit into the fire on the hearth for the penates. They were considered guardians and patrons who looked out for the family. They were a kind of household deity. Varro, fully Marcus Terentius Varro, who lived from 116 BCE to 27 CE, was one of ancient Rome's greatest scholars and a prolific author. In his agricultural treatise, De Re Rustica, also called Res Rusticae, Varro divided the agricultural year into 8 phases, and during the phase from the winter solstice to February 7th, when Favonius the west wind was thought to start blowing favorably, he wrote it was not the time for hard work, but for odd jobs and for tidying. Columella, fully Lucius Junius Moderatus Columella, who lived from 4 CE to circa 70 CE and was a prominent writer on agriculture in the Roman Empire, wrote that farmers who were religiosiores, more observant, and for lack of a better term, more orthodox than others, would refrain from working the land until January 13th, other than on January 1st, when he wrote that they should make an auspicious gesture, an auspiacandi causa, of beginning work on everything they wanted to get done that year. Intriguingly, this actually pops up in various legends of the saints around Christmas time, that they would show up around this time of year, and whatever you were doing when they blessed you was what you would do for the rest of the year. So if you were doing good things, then you would continue doing good things. And if you were doing things that built your family prosperity, then you would continue doing things that built your family prosperity. But if you were doing cruel or stupid or wasteful things, then that is also what would continue being you for the entire year. And sometimes this was done like the saint would come, and if you started whipping your wife, well, then you would keep whipping your wife for the entire day, and you can follow that to its natural and rather bloody conclusion. Anyway, so the January Kalends were a time of ease, which involved making offerings to the household gods and making auspicious gestures that would be echoed throughout the rest of the year, and doing odd jobs and tidying. But was there a party like on New Year's today? Not only were the January Kalends essentially a New Year's party by today's standards, but they were one that lasted up to 5 days. On the eve of the Kalends, crowds joined in processions with singing and heavy drinking until dawn, and then sleeping through the morning to recuperate. On the day of the Kalends, as we've already described, the Roman consuls were inducted into office, and then festivities took place in the homes of all, rich and poor, for several days. Like Saturnalia, the January Kalends were a time to decorate with evergreen branches and lights, and to exchange gifts. Libanius, who lived from circa 314 to 392 or 393 CE, a Greek teacher of rhetoric who wrote during the rise of the Christian hegemony in the later Roman Empire, while remaining unconverted, he was considered a pagan Hellen, once commented that at the January Kalends, everywhere may be seen carousals and well-laden tables. Luxurious abundance is found in the houses of the rich, but also in the houses of the poor, better food than usual is put upon the table. The impulse to spend seizes everyone. He who the whole year through has taken pleasure in saving and piling up his pence becomes suddenly extravagant. People are not only generous toward themselves, but also towards their fellow men. A stream of presents pours itself out on all sides. The Kalends festival banishes all that is connected with toil and allows men to give themselves up to undisturbed enjoyment. So the New Year's was actually the time when the Romans gave their genuine gifts, their extravagant gifts, and Saturnalia was when they gave joke gifts and troll gifts. Now you see both. As being part of Christmas. People give both kinds of gifts. Not any one individual person, though I'm sure that there are some people who do both. But you see both as part of the holiday celebration. At that time in Rome, it was more common to do one during one period and one during the other. So, Sol Invictus, and then we'll be done with this class. So Saturnalia was from December 17th to the 23rd, and January Kalends celebration started on the eve the night before January 1st and then lasted for several days. In between those two festivals was the second major observance in the Roman period. Wow. Primarily, this was a religious observance, the birthday of the sun god, Sol Invictus. This occurred sometime between December 23rd and December 25th, but most of our well-documented history on it has it on December 25th. Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, was the official sun god of the later Roman Empire and the patron deity of Roman soldiers. On the 25th of December in 274 CE, the Roman Emperor Aurelian declared the worship of Sol Invictus an official religion alongside the traditional Roman cults. Aurelian built a temple to Sol Invictus in Rome with its own college of priests. Historians disagree about whether the new deity was a refoundation of the ancient Roman cult of Sol, a revival of the cult of Elagabalus, an Arab Roman sun god, or something entirely new. Sol was the personification of the sun and a god in the ancient Roman religion. It has been argued by scholars that Rome actually had two different consecutive sun gods. The first, Sol Indigus, was thought to have been unimportant, disappearing altogether during the early Roman period. Only in the late Roman Empire, scholars argued, did the solar cult reappear with the arrival in Rome of Sol Invictus, who they argued had Syrian roots and was popular due to the spread and influence of the Mithraic mysteries. Recent publications have challenged the notion of there being two different sun gods in Rome, pointing to the abundant evidence for the continuity of the cult of Sol and the lack of any clear differentiation, either in name or depiction, between the early and late Roman sun god. According to these later publications, both Sol and Sol Invictus are the same deity, and it was only a resurgence of belief that occurred during the spread of the Mithraic mysteries. Mithraism, which is centered on Mithras, a god of light and truth, who was also identified as a warrior god and associated with soldiers, was popular in Rome. Joining the two gods together, some altars were dedicated to Sol Invictus Mithras, and Roman emperors following Aurelian were connected with this version of the religion of the sun, one that recognized both Sol Invictus and Mithras. Sol Invictus appeared on the coins of the emperors after Aurelian until the last third part of the reign of Constantine I. Emperors portrayed Sol Invictus on their official coinage with a wide range of legends, only a few of which incorporated the epithet Invictus, such as the legend Soli Invicto Comiti, claiming the unconquered sun as a companion to the emperor, which was used with particular frequency by Constantine I. Let's see. Statues of Sol Invictus, carried by standard bearers, appear in 3 places in reliefs on the Ark of Constantine. And Constantine official coinage, as we said, continued bearing images of Sol Invictus until the latter third part of his reign. So he was really into Sol Invictus. Constantine I decreed on March 7th, 321 CE, that the Dies Solis, the day of the sun, Sunday, would be the Roman day of rest. On the venerable day of the sun, let the magistrates and people residing in cities rest, and let all workshops be closed. In the country, however, persons engaged in agriculture may freely and lawfully continue their pursuits, because it often happens that another day is not suitable for grain sowing or vine planting, lest by neglecting the proper moment for such operations, the bounty of heaven should be lost. Constantine's triumphal ark, which we just described as having Sol Invictus on it, was carefully positioned to align with the colossal statue of Sol by the Colosseum, so that Sol formed the dominant backdrop when seen from the direction of main approach towards the ark. So Constantine really framed all of Rome and all of his reign around this figure. The last inscription referring to Sol Invictus dates to 387 CE, and there were enough devotees in the 5th century that the Christian theologian Augustine found it necessary to preach against their beliefs as something that contradicted Christian beliefs. The birthday of Sol Invictus on December 25th was not a pervasive observance among the masses when compared with Saturnalia and the January Kalends. It was likely that the worship of Sol on December 25th included some kind of secret ritual that was popular amongst soldiers and army officers and the military elite and the very wealthy who were involved with the military elite. But it wasn't like Saturnalia and the January Kalends where all of Rome was partying. In the next portion of this class series, we will cover how the early Christians actually observed the occasion of Christ's birth and how the emergent Roman Catholic Empire changed the narrative. And following that, we'll get into the Germanic celebrations of midwinter. But we're actually done with this particular class. And all of that stuff about Constantine is relevant to how all of the Roman holidays blurred and blended and syncretized into what we think of as Christmas now. And then we'll get into how the Germanic stuff blended in there too. Anyway, thank you all for joining us. I know that this was a lot of information. This was longer than the last one. I am trying to keep these classes anywhere between 20 minutes and an hour, but I didn't really want to split up the Roman information. I wanted to have it all in one place. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for sticking with us. Please remember to like and subscribe if you enjoy our content. Leave me a comment below, and whatever you celebrate at this time of year, I hope you have a wonderful one. Be safe out there, everyone. At the temple to return Saturn. Oh, still wrong. I don't know why I'm having such a hard time with this particular set of sentences. Let's try that again. And now I have a song playing in my head. Let's get down to business to defeat the Huns. Okay, really.